The big movie news of 1939, of course, was this little something producer David Selznick put together, and Gone with the Wind, now 50 years old, is still probably the most famous, if not necessarily the finest, American movie ever made. It won 8 Oscars, including one for director Victor Fleming, even though directors George Cukor and Sam Wood and Selznick himself directed lengthy sequences. But then Victor Fleming also directed another one of that year's all-time favorites, a picture which, however, received only a couple of music awards, the movie version of that children's classic, The Wizard of Oz, featuring Burt Lahr, Jack Haley Jr., Ray Bolger, and 16-year-old Miss Judy Garland, who got a special miniature Oscar and sang the Oscar-winning song. Picture historians agree that the American film reached its creative summit in the 3 years from 1939 to 1941, and certainly 39 was an extraordinarily vigorous season that saw 476 U.S. pictures released, an amazing number of which still hold their own today. While Vivien Leigh had won Best Actress and became a movie star from Gone with the Wind, her husband at the time, Laurence Olivier, was nominated that year for this William Wyler-Sam Goldwyn production of Miss Bronte's romantic novel, Wuthering Heights. Olivier didn't win, but the picture made him a movie star, too. And although George Cukor had been fired off Gone with the Wind, he nevertheless had a big success that year with this movie version of Claire Luce's Broadway hit, The Women, with an all-woman cast, including Joan Crawford, Norma Shearer, Rosalind Russell, Joan Fontaine, Paulette Goddard, and an all-color fashion show for good measure. Probably the most legendary female star of all did her best movie that year and her only successful comedy, as Greta Garbo played a Russian communist in pre-war Paris for Ernst Lubitsch's delightful satiric romance Ninotchka, co-starring Melvyn Douglas and co-written by Billy Wilder. Garbo's only rival, Marlene Dietrich, vividly revived her career with the popular Destry Rides Again, co-starring James Stewart in his first Western. But the performance everyone most remembers of Jimmy Stewart's that year was one that essentially became the foundation for his entire subsequent career, as he played the idealistic senator in Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Jimmy got nominated, but he didn't win an Oscar until the following year for The Philadelphia Story with Cary Grant, who, by the way, had 3 pictures released in 1939, including 2 that proved him to be as effective in dramas as in comedies, with George Stevens' adventure story, Gunga Din, and with Jean Arthur and Rita Hayworth in one of my particular favorites, Howard Hawks' flying drama, Only Angels Have Wings.
Joe, now you got your orders. Stay up there and do as I tell you and quit worrying about that blonde.
It's all right, Jeff. I see the lights. I'll make it easy. I'll make it... There he is!
Joe! Joe! Pull him up! Pull him up!
And another star, James Cagney, put an end for over a decade to the popular gangster cycle with Raoul Walsh's The Roaring Twenties. Director John Ford was nominated that year and didn't win, but in retrospect, his achievement in 1939 seems unquestionably the most impressive. 3 films of his were released and accumulated 9 Oscar nominations between them, each picture a classic of Americana. And when I asked Ford once about this record, he referred to it all as just a job of work. There was the American Revolutionary War epic, Drums Along the Mohawk, starring Henry Fonda and Claudette Colbert, Ford's first in color, and Ford's first sound western, the picture that revolutionized the genre, Stagecoach. The New York film critics voted Ford Best Director for this, and it made John Wayne a major star. And finally, with Fonda again, Young Mr. Lincoln, a poetic, deeply touching evocation of the early life of America's most beloved president, at a time when the world was moving again into a terrible war, and there seemed to be many difficult roads to travel ahead.
Ain't you going back, Abe?
No, I think I might go on a piece. Maybe to the top of that hill.
Around this same time again next Thursday with a special look at a still very relevant satirical comedy about Hollywood, the Preston Sturges classic Sullivan's Travels, no relation to Kathleen. Till then, this is Peter Bogdanovich in Los Angeles.